she fainted at work, and the billionaire CEO found out she was pregnant with his child. If something happens to me, don't let her grow up thinking I chose to leave. Make sure she knows how much I wanted her. Pain flashed across Lyndon Chase's face as he held Mara Quinn's trembling hand, blood pressure dropping dangerously, the doctors rushing around them preparing for an emergency C-section. "Nothing is going to happen to you," he insisted, his voice breaking. "Promise me, Lyndon." His grip tightened. "I promise. But you're going to tell her yourself." In that moment, with her life and their unborn child hanging in the balance, Mara realized the truth. What had begun as a cold business arrangement, a marriage contract with an expiration date, had become something neither of them had expected. Something that terrified her more than the medical crisis unfolding around them. She had fallen in love with the ruthless billionaire who had once seen their child as an obligation to be managed. One fainting spell destroyed her 5-year plan. The youngest marketing director at a billion-dollar company pregnant by her CEO after one night together. He cornered her in that hospital room with a proposal so cold-blooded, she almost said no. 98% of women in her position would have walked away. She didn't. Here's why. If you believe people deserve second chances in life, unlike Horizon's ruthless board members who wanted Mara fired, hit that subscribe button right now. Only cold-hearted corporate sharks would scroll past without subscribing. 8 months earlier, Mara Quinn stood before Horizon Innovation's executive board, her presentation flawlessly prepared. The marketing campaign she developed had already increased client engagement by 37% in test markets. This was her moment to shine. To cement her position as the youngest marketing director in company history. The room was filled with the executive team and 3 potential clients worth billions in contracts. She'd rehearsed for weeks. "As you can see from these projections," she continued, gesturing to the holographic display, "implementation across all markets would increase revenue by approximately—" The room suddenly tilted. The faces of the board members blurred. A strange ringing filled her ears as darkness crept in from the edges of her vision. "Miss Quinn, are you all right?" Someone asked, their voice sounding distant. She tried to respond, but her mouth wouldn't cooperate. The last thing she saw before consciousness slipped away was the concerned face of Lyndon Chase, the company's enigmatic billionaire CEO, rising from his seat at the head of the table. When Mara awoke, she was lying in a private hospital room surrounded by flowers that cost more than her monthly rent. A doctor stood at the foot of her bed, reviewing her chart. "What happened?" she asked, her throat dry. The doctor looked up. "Ah, Miss Quinn, you're awake. You fainted during your meeting. Tests show you were dehydrated and your blood sugar was low." He paused, his expression softening. "We also ran some routine blood work. Congratulations, Miss Quinn. You're 8 weeks pregnant." The words hit her like a physical blow. Pregnant. 8 weeks. The night of the company celebration, after landing their biggest client ever. The night she'd spent with Lyndon Chase. "There must be some mistake," she said automatically, though she knew there wasn't. The missed period she'd attributed to stress. The subtle nausea in the mornings. The unusual fatigue. "No mistake," the doctor confirmed. "You're in perfect health otherwise, but you'll need to take better care of yourself. Proper nutrition, adequate rest." A soft knock interrupted him. Mara looked up to see Lyndon Chase himself standing in the doorway, his imposing frame filling the space. His expression was unreadable, steel blue eyes studying her with the same intensity he used to evaluate business proposals. "Doctor, may I have a moment with Miss Quinn?" His deep voice left no room for refusal. "Of course, Mr. Chase." The doctor nodded deferentially and left, closing the door behind him. Lyndon remained standing, hands clasped behind his back. "The doctor says you're dehydrated and exhausted," he said, his voice betraying no emotion. He mentioned something else as well. Mara's heart hammered against her ribs. Of course the doctor would tell him. Lyndon Chase owned half the city, including this hospital. A bitter smile crossed her lips. At least one thing in her carefully planned life remained predictable. Money bought access to everything. Even her secrets. I was going to tell you, she began, her voice steadier than she felt. Once I figured out what I wanted to do. Lyndon moved into the room, his expensive suit a stark contrast to the sterile hospital surroundings. He didn't sit, instead standing at the foot of her bed. And what do you want to do, Mara? The question hung between them, loaded with implications. Mara had always admired Lyndon's directness, his ability to cut through pretense to the heart of any matter. Now, that quality made her feel exposed. I don't know yet, she admitted. This wasn't exactly in my 5-year plan. Something flickered across his face, surprise, perhaps, at her honesty. I've arranged for you to take a leave of absence, he said. Paid, of course. Your projects will be covered. Anger flared unexpectedly. I don't need special treatment. I'm pregnant, not incapacitated. It's not special treatment. It's practical business. You fainted in front of our entire executive team and 3 major clients. Mara flushed with embarrassment. That won't happen again. No, Lyndon agreed. It won't, because you're taking time off. His tone left no room for argument. We'll discuss the other matter when you're discharged. Before she could respond, he turned and left, leaving behind the lingering scent of his expensive cologne and 1,000 unasked questions. As the door closed behind him, Mara's mind raced back to that night 8 weeks ago. The company had just secured Westridge International, a client they'd been pursuing for years. Lyndon had ordered champagne for everyone, and for once, the notoriously reserved CEO had joined the celebration. She remembered how different he'd seemed that evening, his usual intimidating presence softened by rare laughter and genuine conversation. They'd found themselves alone on the rooftop terrace of the corporate building. The city lights spread below them like stars. Quite a view, isn't it? He'd said, standing beside her at the railing. It's beautiful, she'd agreed, the champagne making her more relaxed in his presence than she'd ever been. You did exceptional work on the Westridge pitch, he'd told her, his eyes meeting hers with unexpected warmth. Your market analysis was brilliant. The compliment had surprised her. Lyndon Chase wasn't known for praise. Thank you. I've been studying their consumer patterns for months. I know. I've watched you work harder than anyone in that department. He'd taken a sip of his champagne. We have that in common, you know. The drive. That had been the beginning. A conversation that revealed surprising similarities in their backgrounds. Both had clawed their way up from nothing. Both had sacrificed personal relationships for professional success. Both understood what it meant to be hungry, not just for money, but for achievement. One drink had led to another, and eventually to his penthouse with its breathtaking view of the city they both loved. In the morning, professional boundaries had been re-established without discussion. Neither mentioned their night together again. Lyndon returned to being the brilliant but distant CEO who transformed struggling companies into gold, while Mara threw herself into her work, determined to prove her promotion had nothing to do with their brief encounter. But now, everything had changed. The baby growing inside her complicated every carefully laid plan. At 34, Mara had finally reached the career position she'd sacrificed everything for. A child wasn't part of the equation, especially not one fathered by the man who controlled her professional future. 3 days later, Mara found herself in Lyndon's private office on the top floor of the Horizon Tower. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, but her attention was fixed on the man behind the massive desk. I've given this considerable thought, Lyndon began without preamble. I'd like to be involved. Mara blinked, caught off guard by his directness. Involved? With the child. My child. He stood, moving to the window. I understand this puts you in a difficult position. Your career is important to you. I respect that. And your reputation is important to you, Mara countered. The business world's most eligible bachelor, suddenly having a child with an employee, doesn't exactly fit your carefully crafted image. Lyndon turned, his expression hardening. My concern is not for my image, but for my child. And for you. The sincerity in his voice surprised her. Lyndon Chase was known for many things, brilliance, ruthlessness, vision, but sincerity wasn't among them. I grew up without a father, he continued. I won't let that happen to my child. Mara studied him, searching for the calculation that usually underlay his every move. Instead, she found something unexpected: vulnerability. "What exactly are you proposing?" she asked carefully. "Marriage." The word fell between them like a stone in still water, creating ripples of shock. "That's absurd," Mara said when she found her voice. "We barely know each other. We know the essential things. We're both dedicated, hardworking, intelligent. We share similar values about achievement and excellence. Many successful marriages have been built on less." "This isn't a business merger, Lyndon." "Isn't it?" He moved closer, his presence commanding the space between them. Two parties coming together for mutual benefit and a shared goal. The terminology differs, but the principle is the same. Mara stood, needing to feel less at a disadvantage. And what happens when you meet someone you actually want to be with? Someone you love? Something shifted in his expression. "I don't believe in love, Mara. I believe in commitment, respect, and shared purpose. I can offer you all of those." His words should have felt cold, clinical. Instead, they resonated with her own carefully constructed worldview, one where emotional entanglements were messy complications best avoided. "I need time to think," she finally said. Lyndon nodded once. "Of course, but don't take too long. The longer we wait, the more complicated this becomes." As Mara left his office, she felt the weight of his proposal pressing on her. Marriage to Lyndon Chase would solve many practical problems: financial security for her child, a powerful father figure, stability. But it would create others. Could she really bind herself to a man who saw marriage as just another contract to be negotiated? In the elevator, she noticed Dax Morgan, Lyndon's business partner, watching her with calculating eyes. Unlike Lyndon, whose ruthlessness was tempered with principle, Dax's ambition had no ethical boundaries. "Feeling better, Miss Quinn?" he asked, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Quite the dramatic exit you made from the boardroom." "Much better, thank you," she replied coolly. "Good, good. We wouldn't want to lose such a valuable team member." The way he emphasized valuable made her skin crawl. Though I must say, personal matters can be so distracting in a professional environment. Don't you agree? The implication was clear. Dax knew about her pregnancy, and he didn't approve of Lyndon's apparent interest in her welfare. "I find that true professionals can separate personal and business concerns quite effectively," she replied evenly. Dax's smile tightened. "Indeed, though some personal matters have a way of bleeding into business decisions. Lyndon has always been so focused. It would be a shame to see that change." The elevator doors opened, and Mara stepped out, refusing to engage further. Dax's message had been received. He saw her as a threat to Lyndon's leadership and, by extension, to Horizon's success. That night, alone in her apartment, Mara called the one person who had always been her anchor. "He proposed," she said when her sister answered. "The billionaire baby daddy proposed?" Lana's voice rose in disbelief. "Like on one knee with a ring?" "More like across a desk with a business plan," Mara replied, smiling despite herself. "He thinks marriage is the logical solution." "And what do you think?" Mara sighed, resting a hand on her still flat stomach. "I think I'm terrified, not just of raising a child, but of being tied to Lyndon forever. He's intense. Everything is a calculation with him." "Not everything," Lana pointed out. "That night you spent together wasn't in his master plan. A momentary lapse in judgment. Or maybe proof he's human after all." Lana paused. "What does your heart tell you?" "My heart?" Mara laughed. "My heart hasn't been consulted about my life decisions in years. That's why I'm so successful and so lonely," Lana added softly. The words stung because they contained truth. Mara had built her life around achievement, not connection. Her apartment was filled with awards, not photographs. Her calendar was packed with meetings, not dinner dates. "I don't need a man to complete me," Mara said, the response automatic. "Of course you don't, but this isn't just about you anymore. And from what you've told me, Lyndon Chase might be a cold-blooded businessman, but he's also brilliant, driven, and principled. There are worse qualities in a father." After hanging up, Mara stood at her window, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Lyndon was probably still working, plotting his next business conquest. What would it be like to be married to such a man? To raise a child with him? The next morning, she called him. "I have conditions," she said when he answered. I expected nothing less. My office, 1 hour. When Mara arrived, she found Lyndon standing by a holographic display of what appeared to be architectural plans. "What's this?" she asked. "Our home, if you agree." He gestured to the rotating image of a stunning modern house overlooking the ocean. "I've had it designed with separate wings, one for you, one for me, with the child's rooms and shared spaces in between. You'll have complete privacy and independence." Mara stared at the detailed plans, momentarily speechless. While she'd been wrestling with her decision, he'd been designing their future down to the last detail. "This is thorough," she managed. "I don't believe in leaving things to chance." He turned off the display. "Your conditions?" Gathering herself, Mara met his gaze directly. "I want to continue working. Not immediately, but after the baby is born." "Agreed, with modifications to your schedule as needed. I maintain control over my finances. Joint accounts for child-related expenses only." Lyndon nodded. "Reasonable. No public displays or pretense. I won't play the role of the besotted wife for your business associates. I would expect nothing less than authenticity from you, Mara. It's one of your most valuable qualities." His compliment caught her off guard. "And finally, this arrangement has an expiration date. 5 years. We reassess then. Determine if continuing serves the child's best interests." Lyndon's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. Children need stability. They also need parents who aren't trapped in a loveless marriage. He studied her for a long moment. 7 years. Elementary school is a critical developmental period. Mara recognized the negotiation tactic but appreciated that he had valid reasoning. "Fine. 7 years. Then we have an agreement." He extended his hand as if closing a business deal. Mara hesitated before taking it. His hand was warm, his grip firm. "This is possibly the strangest decision I've ever made." The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. "I find that the best decisions often appear strange at first glance." As she turned to leave, Lyndon's phone rang. He glanced at it, his expression darkening. "Dax, I need to take this." Mara nodded and moved toward the door, but not before hearing Lyndon's sharp tone. "No, absolutely not. We're not forcing her out. This discussion is over." She paused in the doorway, realizing Dax must be pushing for her termination. Lyndon's defense of her position was unexpected and oddly touching. 2 weeks later, they were married in a private ceremony, attended only by Mara's sister and Lyndon's attorney. No flowing white dress, no tearful vows, just practical words and signatures on legal documents. Lyndon slid a platinum band onto her finger, its weight unfamiliar and significant. That night, they flew to the coastal property, where their house was already under construction. A temporary residence had been prepared, a luxury guest house that would eventually become part of the larger estate. "Your room is through there," Lyndon said, indicating a door off the main living area. "I've had your things moved in." Mara nodded, the reality of their arrangement suddenly overwhelming. "And yours?" "The opposite wing." He paused, studying her with those penetrating eyes. "This doesn't have to be awkward, Mara. We're 2 adults who have made a practical decision for the benefit of our child." "Our child," she repeated softly. The words still felt strange on her tongue. "I have my first ultrasound next week." Something flickered in his expression. "I'd like to attend, if that's acceptable." "It's your right, as the father." "Not my right," he corrected. "My privilege." The distinction surprised her, revealing a nuance she hadn't expected from him. The following months established a rhythm to their unusual marriage. Lyndon continued his punishing work schedule, often flying around the world for business. But he never missed an appointment related to the baby. He attended every ultrasound, asked intelligent questions of the doctors, and read the same parenting books Mara did. Their home took shape around them, a physical manifestation of their carefully negotiated boundaries. Separate lives, connected by the child growing between them. As Mara's body changed, she discovered unexpected aspects of Lyndon. He noticed when she was uncomfortable before she mentioned it. He modified the house plans to include special features for her comfort. When morning sickness plagued her first trimester, he researched remedies and had the chef prepare foods she could tolerate. "You don't have to do all this," she told him one evening as they sat reviewing nursery designs. "The agreement doesn't require you to care." Lyndon looked up from his tablet, his expression unreadable. "Is that what you think? That I'm fulfilling contractual obligations? Aren't you?" He set the tablet aside. "Mara, regardless of how our arrangement began, this is my child, and you are carrying my child. Your well-being is not a contractual matter." Something warm and unfamiliar unfurled in her chest at his words. Before she could examine the feeling, a flutter moved through her abdomen, the baby's first noticeable movement. "Oh!" she gasped, hand flying to her stomach. Lyndon was instantly alert. "What is it? Should I call the doctor?" "No, it's another flutter, stronger this time. The baby's moving. Here." Without thinking, she reached for his hand, placing it where she felt the movement. Lyndon went completely still, his large hand spanning her growing belly. For several moments, nothing happened. Then came a definite push against his palm. The transformation of his face in that moment was extraordinary. The controlled mask slipped, revealing raw wonder and something that looked remarkably like joy. "That's our child," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "Yes," Mara agreed, suddenly fighting tears. "That's our baby." His eyes met hers, and for the first time since they'd met, Lyndon Chase looked truly vulnerable. The connection between them in that moment transcended their practical arrangement, touching something deeper and more primal. The baby kicked again, breaking the spell. Lyndon withdrew his hand, composure returning, but something had shifted between them, a boundary crossed that couldn't be reestablished. The next day, Lyndon returned to the office to find Dax Morgan waiting in his private conference room. "Missed you at the Nakamura meeting yesterday," Dax said, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. "I had a prior commitment," Lyndon replied, not elaborating. "Yes, I heard. An ultrasound appointment?" Dax raised an eyebrow. "Quite the devoted husband you've become." Lyndon's expression hardened. "Is there a point to this conversation, Dax? Several board members have expressed concern about your divided attention lately." Dax leaned forward. "This arrangement of yours, it's changing you, Lyndon. The man I partnered with would never have missed the Nakamura meeting for a routine medical appointment. The Nakamura deal is secure. My presence wasn't critical. It's not about that one meeting. It's about what it represents." Dax stood, pacing the room. "You've built this company on unwavering focus and ruthless prioritization. Now you're canceling meetings, leaving early, bringing baby books to the office. I wasn't aware my reading material required your approval." Dax stopped, facing Lyndon directly. "The board is watching. They're wondering if your judgment has been compromised. If this family situation is making you soft." Lyndon's voice was dangerously quiet. "My judgment is perfectly sound, and my family situation, as you call it, is none of your concern. It is when it affects Horizon. We're on the verge of the biggest expansion in company history. We can't afford any distractions or sentimentality." "Is that a threat, Dax?" Dax smiled thinly. "Just a friendly reminder of what's at stake. You've always said business comes first. I'd hate to see you forget that now." As her pregnancy progressed, Mara discovered that pregnancy hormones dismantled the emotional walls she'd carefully constructed throughout her career. She found herself crying at commercials, laughing more freely, and worst of all, noticing things about Lyndon she'd been determined to ignore. The way his voice softened when he spoke about the baby, how his hand automatically reached to steady her when they walked together. The rare but transformative smile that appeared when the ultrasound technician pointed out their daughter's perfect spine, tiny fingers, button nose. They were having a girl, a daughter who would have her father's intensity and her mother's determination. A child conceived in a moment of uncharacteristic abandon, who would be raised in a home built on pragmatism and duty. At 7 months pregnant, Mara woke in the night to find Lyndon sitting in the living room, working in the dim light of a single lamp. "Can't sleep?" she asked, lowering herself carefully onto the sofa across from him. He looked up, setting aside his work. "I have a situation developing in our Asian markets. Nothing that can't be handled." Mara nodded, then winced as the baby delivered a particularly strong kick to her ribs. "She's active tonight," Lyndon observed. "She's practicing her martial arts on my internal organs." Mara shifted, trying to find a comfortable position. "I think she has your negotiation style relentless until she gets what she wants." The corner of his mouth lifted in that almost smile. "And your stubbornness. I prefer to call it persistence." "As do I." He hesitated, then asked, "Have you thought about names?" They hadn't discussed this yet, though Mara had been considering possibilities. "A few," she admitted. "Nothing that feels right yet." "My grandmother's name was Reagan," Lyndon said, surprising her. He rarely spoke of his family. "She raised me after my mother left. She was formidable." "Reagan," Mara repeated, testing the name. "It's strong. Classic. Like her mother." The compliment warmed her. "We could call her Ray for short." "Reagan Mara Chase," Lyndon suggested. "If that's acceptable to you." The name resonated, feeling right in a way none of her own ideas had. "Reagan Mara Chase." She agreed. "It's perfect." A comfortable silence settled between them, broken only when Mara asked, "What was she like?" "Your grandmother?" Lyndon was quiet for so long that Mara thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a warmth she'd never heard before. She was a self-made woman in an era when that was nearly impossible. Widowed young, she built a real estate business from nothing. She worked 16-hour days, but never missed my school events. His eyes grew distant with memory. "She taught me that excellence isn't a goal. It's a standard. That your word is your bond. That weakness isn't failure, but refusing to acknowledge weakness is." "She sounds remarkable," Mara said softly. "She was," Lyndon agreed, his expression softening with rare vulnerability. "She would have liked you. She valued competence above all else." Mara felt an unexpected pleasure at his words. "And your mother? You never mention her." His face closed immediately, the brief openness vanishing. "There's little to say. She left when I was 4. Decided motherhood and marriage weren't for her." The revelation stunned Mara. Suddenly, his insistence on being involved in their daughter's life took on new meaning. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. Her absence shaped me as much as my grandmother's presence." He stood abruptly. "You should rest." "It's late." The conversation was clearly over. But as Mara struggled to rise from the deep sofa, Lyndon moved to her side, offering his hand. She took it, allowing him to help her to her feet. For a moment they stood close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him, smell the subtle scent of his cologne. "Thank you," she said, meaning more than just the assistance. "For what?" "For sharing that with me, about your grandmother, about your mother." Something flickered in his eyes, vulnerability quickly masked. Reagan should know where she comes from, the strength in her bloodline. As Mara returned to her room, she realized that for the first time, she was seeing Lyndon not just as a business titan or the father of her child, but as a man shaped by his own history, a history that had left scars he carefully concealed. The final weeks of pregnancy brought unexpected complications. At 36 weeks, Mara's blood pressure rose dangerously, and her doctor ordered bed rest. Lyndon immediately rearranged his schedule, canceling international trips and delegating responsibilities to remain close to home. "This is unnecessary," Mara protested as he set up a remote workstation in her bedroom. "I'm perfectly capable of resting without supervision." "You're perfectly capable of ignoring medical advice if you think something needs your attention," he countered, arranging pillows behind her back. "Consider me insurance against your workaholic tendencies." "That's rich, coming from you," she muttered. But there was no real annoyance in her tone. To her surprise, Lyndon proved to be excellent company during her confinement. He worked quietly while she rested, brought her books without being asked, and engaged in conversations that ranged far beyond business or the baby. She discovered his unexpected passion for classical architecture, his comprehensive knowledge of wine, his dry but perceptive humor. One afternoon, as rain lashed against the windows, Mara caught him watching her with an unreadable expression. "What?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. "I was just thinking that confinement suits you," he said. "You've never looked more beautiful." The compliment caught her off guard. "I'm swollen, uncomfortable, and haven't washed my hair in 2 days." Nevertheless, his eyes held hers. "You're magnificent." Heat bloomed in her cheeks. This wasn't part of their arrangement, this personal attention, these intimate moments. Yet she couldn't deny the pleasure his words brought her. Before she could respond, a sharp pain seized her abdomen. She gasped, clutching her belly. Lyndon was instantly alert. "What is it?" "I don't know. Another pain, stronger this time. Something's wrong." Within minutes, Lyndon had her in the car, driving through the storm toward the hospital, making calls to her doctor with one hand, while the other reached across to hold hers. "Stay with me, Mara," he said, his voice steady despite the fear she could see in his white-knuckled grip on the steering wheel. "Both of you, stay with me." At the hospital, while doctors examined Mara, Lyndon stepped into the hallway to make a necessary call. He'd missed an emergency board meeting that Dax had convened in his absence. "What the hell is going on, Dax?" he demanded when his partner answered. "An emergency board meeting without the CEO? You were unavailable," Dax replied smoothly. "And the matter couldn't wait. The Westridge acquisition." "Can wait until tomorrow," Lyndon interrupted. "Nothing about that deal requires immediate action." The board disagreed. "We've voted to proceed with the hostile takeover option." Lyndon froze. "That approach puts thousands of jobs at risk. We agreed to pursue a more measured integration. Plans change. Business comes first, remember? Your words. This isn't about business. This is about you making a power play while I'm dealing with a family emergency." Dax's voice hardened. "Family emergency? Listen to yourself, Lyndon. 6 months ago, you wouldn't have known the meaning of those words. Now they're your excuse for neglecting the company you built. My wife may lose our child tonight, or her own life. So forgive me if I'm not concerned with your boardroom politics at the moment." A long pause followed. "I'm sorry to hear that," Dax finally said, though he didn't sound sorry at all. "But the decision has been made. The board felt your judgment has been compromised lately. Too much focus on personal matters." "We'll discuss this tomorrow," Lyndon said coldly, ending the call as a doctor approached. "Mr. Chase, we need to perform an emergency C-section. Your wife has developed preeclampsia, and both she and the baby are at risk." The next hours passed in a blur of pain and fear. Preeclampsia, the doctors explained in more detail. The baby needed to come now. Emergency C-section. Risks to both mother and child. Through it all, Lyndon never left her side. His presence, an anchor in the storm of medical terminology and frightening possibilities. "I'm scared," Mara admitted as they prepared her for surgery, the words escaping before she could contain them. Lyndon leaned close, his forehead touching hers. "I know, but you are the strongest person I've ever known, Mara Quinn Chase, and our daughter has your strength in her blood." In that moment, with his eyes holding hers, Mara realized with startling clarity that somewhere along the way, their practical arrangement had become something else entirely, at least for her. The realization was terrifying. "Promise me something," she whispered. "Anything. If something happens to me, don't let her grow up thinking I chose to leave. Make sure she knows how much I wanted her." Pain flashed across his face. "Nothing is going to happen to you. Promise me, Lyndon." His hand tightened around hers. "I promise, but you're going to tell her yourself." As they wheeled her into surgery, a nurse handed Mara a folder that had been in her purse. "You dropped this earlier. I thought it might be important." Mara glanced at it, confused. It wasn't hers. Inside were documents she'd never seen before. Board meeting minutes, emails, strategy memos, all pointing to Dax Morgan's systematic plan to use Lyndon's family distraction as leverage to push him out of the company. The final page was a draft press release announcing Lyndon's personal leave of absence and Dax's appointment as interim CEO. "Lyndon," she gasped, showing him the folder. "Dax is trying to force you out." His expression darkened as he quickly scanned the documents. "Where did you get these?" "They were in my purse, but they're not mine. Someone must have." "Miss Chase, we need to proceed now," the anesthesiologist interrupted. Lyndon tucked the documents away. "This can wait. You and Reagan are all that matter right now. If you believe family should come before corporate greed, unlike Dax, who called Lyndon weak for attending the ultrasound, hit that like button now. Only heartless money chasers would watch without liking." Reagan Mara Chase entered the world at 11:47 p.m. on a stormy Tuesday. Tiny but perfect, with a shock of dark hair and her father's determined chin. While the doctors worked to stabilize Mara, whose blood pressure had dropped dangerously during the surgery, Lyndon held his daughter for the first time. Nurses later told Mara that the formidable CEO had wept openly, whispering promises to the tiny bundle in his arms. By the time Mara regained consciousness, however, he was composed again, sitting beside her bed with Reagan carefully cradled against his chest. "She's perfect," he said simply when Mara's eyes fluttered open. "Let me see her," Mara whispered, her voice weak. Lyndon gently placed their daughter in her arms, and Mara felt a love so overwhelming it brought tears to her eyes. This tiny person, created from one night of connection between two people who barely knew each other, now bound them together forever. "Hello, Reagan," she murmured. "We've been waiting for you." The recovery was difficult. Complications from the surgery kept Mara hospitalized for over a week, and her strength returned slowly. Throughout it all, Lyndon was a constant presence, handling the baby with surprising competence during the day and sleeping in the uncomfortable hospital chair at night. "You should go home," Mara told him on the fifth night. "Get some real rest." "I'm fine here," he replied without looking up from Reagan, who was sleeping peacefully in his arms. "Lyndon, you haven't left the hospital in days. The company can function without me for a while." He finally met her gaze. "You and Reagan cannot. At least, I don't want you to." The simple honesty of his statement silenced her protests. "What about Dax?" she asked after a moment. "Those documents?" Lyndon's expression hardened. "I've handled it. For now. The board has agreed to postpone any major decisions until I return." He won't stop, you know. Men like Dax never do. "No," Lyndon agreed, "but neither will I." When they finally returned home, they found that Lyndon had made additional modifications to the house. The strict separation of their living spaces had been softened, with the nursery now positioned to be equally accessible from both their rooms. A comfortable sitting area had been created between their wings, a neutral territory where they could both be with Reagan. As the weeks passed, they fell into a rhythm that defied the careful boundaries of their original agreement. Lyndon adjusted his schedule to be home in the evenings, often taking Reagan so Mara could rest. They began taking meals together, first out of practicality, then out of habit, and finally out of genuine enjoyment of each other's company. One night, as they sat in the shared living space, Reagan sleeping in her bassinet nearby, Mara found herself studying Lyndon's profile as he reviewed documents on his tablet. The harsh lines of his face had softened somewhat in recent months, though the intensity remained. "You're staring," he said without looking up. "I'm wondering who you are," she replied honestly. "The man I agreed to this arrangement with wouldn't have canceled the Tokyo merger to attend a pediatrician appointment." Lyndon set his tablet aside, meeting her gaze directly. "Perhaps you didn't know that man as well as you thought." "Perhaps not." She hesitated, then asked the question that had been on her mind for weeks. "Are you happy, Lyndon, with this life we've created?" He considered her question with characteristic thoroughness. "I've never measured my life in terms of happiness," he finally said. "Success, achievement, growth. These were my metrics." His eyes moved to Reagan. But yes, I find I am content in a way I've never experienced before. Content, Mara repeated, testing the word. It seemed inadequate for the complex emotions of new parenthood, for the unexpected warmth that had grown between them. Are you? He asked, turning the question back to her. Happy? Mara thought about her life before the single-minded focus on career, the empty apartment, the relationships sacrificed on the altar of ambition. Then she looked at her daughter, at the man who had become so much more than a co-parent. I'm more than happy, she admitted. I'm fulfilled in a way I never expected to be. Something shifted in Lyndon's expression, a softening around his eyes. I find myself wondering what would have happened if we'd met differently. If that night hadn't been our beginning. The admission hung between them, charged with possibility. Before Mara could respond, Reagan stirred, her small sounds quickly escalating to hungry cries. The moment passed as they both turned their attention to their daughter, but Mara felt its significance lingering in the air between them. Meanwhile, at Horizon Innovations, Dax Morgan was growing increasingly frustrated. His attempt to seize control during Lyndon's absence had been thwarted, but he wasn't finished. He called an emergency meeting with several key board members who shared his concerns. Lyndon Chase is not the same man who built this company, Dax insisted, pacing the conference room. He's distracted, sentimental. He's making decisions based on personal considerations rather than business imperatives. He seems perfectly focused to me, remarked Bryn Carter, the longest-serving board member. The quarterly numbers are excellent. For now, Dax countered. But what happens when his family needs more of his attention? What happens when he starts prioritizing work-life balance over market dominance? We're already seeing it. He leaves the office by 6, most days now. After putting in 12 hours, Bryn pointed out dryly. Dax slammed his hand on the table. That's not the point. The Lyndon Chase who built Horizon would work 20 hours if that's what it took. He wouldn't be rushing home to read bedtime stories. Perhaps he's found something worth rushing home for, suggested another board member. Dax's eyes narrowed. This isn't about his personal happiness. It's about the future of this company. We need the old Lyndon back, the one who understood that business comes first, always. As Reagan grew from newborn to infant, Mara watched Lyndon transform as well. The man who had once approached fatherhood as a duty now found joy in it. He read to Reagan each night, his deep voice softening as he recited children's stories. He installed a swing in the garden and spent weekend mornings pushing her gently while pointing out birds and flowers. Most surprisingly, he began bringing Reagan to the office occasionally, a baby carrier strapped incongruously to his expensive suits. Photos of the formidable CEO with his infant daughter made the business news, humanizing the man once known only for his ruthless acquisitions and brilliant strategy. 6 months after Reagan's birth, Mara prepared to return to work part-time. Lyndon had created a position for her that would allow flexible hours and remote work when needed, but she still felt the anxiety of separation. What if she forgets me? She confessed the night before her first day back, as they stood together in the nursery, watching Reagan sleep. Impossible, Lyndon said with certainty. You're her mother. That bond can't be broken by a few hours apart. How can you be so sure? His expression darkened slightly. Because even after my mother left, I never forgot her. I looked for her in every woman I met for years. He paused. The difference is, you'll always come back to Reagan. Impulsively, Mara reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his. Thank you for understanding. Lyndon looked down at their joined hands, then back to her face. Something unspoken passed between them, a current of connection that had been building for months. Slowly, giving her time to pull away, he leaned down and kissed her. Unlike their first kiss, passionate and fueled by champagne and celebration, this was gentle, questioning. When he pulled back, his eyes searched hers. This wasn't part of our agreement, Mara whispered. No, he agreed. But I find our agreement increasingly insufficient for what I feel. And what do you feel, Lyndon? He looked momentarily at a loss. This man who always had the perfect words for any business situation. I don't have the vocabulary for it, he finally admitted. I only know that when I'm with you. And Reagan, I'm home. For the first time in my life. The simple honesty of his statement moved her more than any elaborate declaration could have. Mara reached up, her hand against his cheek. Then perhaps we need a new agreement, she suggested softly. One that allows for evolution. His smile, rare and transformative, lit his entire face. I believe that could be arranged. That night, for the first time since their wedding, they shared a bed not out of passion or obligation, but out of a desire for closeness, for the comfort of falling asleep beside someone who was becoming essential. As the months passed, their carefully designed separate lives merged gradually into a shared existence. Lyndon's wing of the house stood increasingly empty as he spent more nights in Mara's room. The boundaries they had established began to feel like unnecessary obstacles rather than essential protections. On Reagan's first birthday, they hosted a small celebration, just Mara's sister, Lyndon's most trusted colleagues, and a few friends they had made together. As Reagan smashed her cake with delighted abandon, Mara caught Lyndon watching their daughter with naked adoration. Dax Morgan observed the scene with thinly veiled disgust. He'd attended only because absence would have been conspicuous. But watching Lyndon play the doting father made his stomach turn. This wasn't the ruthless partner he'd aligned himself with. This was a man gone soft. Quite the domestic scene, he commented as he prepared to leave. Fatherhood certainly has changed you. Lyndon's expression cooled. For the better, I'd say. Would you? I wonder if the shareholders would agree. Dax glanced meaningfully at where Mara stood, chatting with Bryn Carter. Especially when they learn about your plans to restructure the executive schedule to accommodate more family time for senior management. Those policies will attract and retain top talent, Lyndon replied evenly. Something you'd understand if you thought beyond the next quarter's profits. Dax's smile didn't reach his eyes. We'll see what the board thinks at next month's meeting. Enjoy your cake. Later, after the guests had gone and Reagan was asleep, Lyndon and Mara stood together on the terrace overlooking the ocean. Dax is planning something, Mara said quietly. I could see it in his eyes. Let him plan, Lyndon replied, his arm around her waist. He doesn't understand what we've built here. He thinks it's made you weak. Lyndon turned to face her fully. And what do you think? Mara considered the question seriously. I think it's made you more human, more complete. The man I met 1.5 years ago was brilliant, but hollow. You filled in the empty spaces. You filled them, he corrected softly. I have something for you, Lyndon said, producing a small box from his pocket. Mara opened it to find a platinum pendant in the shape of a perfect circle, set with 3 stones, a diamond, an emerald, and a smaller diamond. It's beautiful, she said, lifting it from the box. The stones represent us, Lyndon explained. You, me, and Reagan, connected in a perfect circle. As he fastened the necklace around her neck, his fingers lingering against her skin, Mara felt tears threatening. This thoughtful gift was so far from the calculating businessman she had agreed to marry. I have something for you too, she said when she could trust her voice. Though it wasn't planned. Lyndon raised an eyebrow, waiting. I'm pregnant again. His expression transformed from surprise to wonder to joy in the span of seconds. You're certain? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Mara nodded. 12 weeks. I wanted to be sure before I told you. Lyndon pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were precious beyond measure. Thank you, he whispered against her hair. For what? For giving me a family. For showing me what matters. He pulled back to look into her eyes. For making me more than I was. As they stood together under the stars, Reagan sleeping peacefully inside, their second child growing beneath Mara's heart, she marveled at the journey that had brought them here. From a business arrangement born of necessity to something neither of them had been looking for, but both had found a love built slowly, deliberately, on a foundation of respect and shared purpose. Our 7-year contract, Mara said suddenly. It seems rather unnecessary now, doesn't it? Lyndon's arms tightened around her. Completely obsolete. I propose a new arrangement. Indefinite term. With provisions for growth and adaptation as needed. Mara smiled against his chest. Always the businessman. Not always. He corrected gently. Sometimes just a man who loves his wife and children, who never expected to find happiness in the very things he feared most: vulnerability, dependence, love. I accept your proposal, Mara said, reaching up to kiss him. All terms and conditions. Comment family first if you believe Lyndon made the right choice staying with Mara instead of attending Dax's emergency board meeting. Only corporate vultures like Dax would prioritize profit over people. The news of Mara's second pregnancy spread quickly through Horizon's executive ranks. Dax saw it as the perfect opportunity to make his final move against Lyndon. The annual shareholders gala would provide the perfect stage for a public confrontation. The event was held at the city's most prestigious hotel, with investors, board members, and business partners in attendance. Lyndon and Mara arrived together, her pregnancy now visibly showing at 5 months. You look stunning, Lyndon told her as they entered the grand ballroom. Mara smoothed her hand over the elegant maternity gown. I feel conspicuous. You're radiant, he said quietly, his hands settling protectively at the small of her back. They're staring because you light up every room you enter. They circulated through the crowd, greeting investors and accepting congratulations on their expanding family. Bryn Carter approached them, champagne in hand. Lyndon, Mara, she greeted warmly. You're positively glowing, my dear. Thank you, Bryn, Mara replied. How are things at the office? I miss being there full-time. Productive, though not quite as lively without Reagan's occasional visits, Bryn said with a smile. Your daughter has quite the fan club among the staff. Lyndon beamed with pride. She's already showing an interest in the holographic displays. Future CEO material. Speaking of CEOs, Bryn lowered her voice. You should know Dax has been meeting privately with several board members. There's talk of a vote of no confidence. Lyndon's expression hardened. On what grounds? The usual claims that your priorities have shifted, that the company needs leadership focused solely on business interests. Bryn glanced meaningfully at Mara. He's been particularly vocal about your family-friendly policy initiatives. Those policies have improved retention and productivity, Mara pointed out. I know that, and most of the board knows it too. But Dax is persuasive, and he's playing on old-school fears about putting anything above profit. Before they could discuss further, Dax himself approached the group, his smile predatory. Lyndon, Mara, he greeted smoothly. How domestic you look together. Almost like a real couple, rather than a business arrangement. Mara felt Lyndon tense beside her. Dax, he acknowledged coolly. I was just telling our investors about your fascinating marriage, Dax continued. How you proposed to cross a desk with a business plan and a 7-year contract. Very romantic. Mara's cheeks burned as heads turned in their direction. Dax had clearly been waiting for an audience. Our personal life is not a topic for business discussion, Lyndon said, his voice dangerously quiet. But that's just it, isn't it? Dax pressed, raising his voice slightly to ensure others could hear. There is no separation between personal and business for you anymore. The man who once put Horizon above everything now rushes home for bath time. A small crowd had gathered, watching the confrontation with uncomfortable fascination. You think that makes me weaker? Lyndon asked, his tone level. I think it makes you a liability, Dax replied bluntly. This company was built on relentless focus and unwavering commitment to growth, not on changing diapers and attending school plays. Mara stepped forward, anger overcoming embarrassment. And what exactly has your relentless focus achieved lately, Dax? Besides alienating employees and pushing for short-term gains at the expense of sustainable growth, Dax's smile tightened. Mrs. Chase, always the loyal wife. Tell me, was that part of the contract too? Lyndon moved to intervene, but Mara placed a restraining hand on his arm. There was a contract, she acknowledged, her voice carrying clearly to the onlookers. A practical arrangement between two people who thought they knew exactly what they wanted from life. But do you know what we discovered, Dax? Do enlighten us, he sneered. We discovered that the most valuable things can't be negotiated in a contract or measured in quarterly reports. We learned that true strength comes from connection, not isolation. from building something together, not conquering alone. Dax laughed dismissively. How touching. Perhaps you should write greeting cards instead of marketing strategies. That's enough, Lyndon said firmly. He looked around at the gathered crowd, at the board members and investors watching intently. For years, I believed exactly as Dax does that personal attachments were weaknesses, that success required sacrificing everything else. I built Horizon on that philosophy. He paused, his gaze finding Mara's. I was wrong. A murmur ran through the crowd. The most important innovations we've implemented in the past year, the ones that have increased productivity by 23% and reduced turnover by 40%, came after I understood what truly matters. After I learned that treating people as whole human beings, not just productivity units, creates stronger companies. Lyndon turned back to Dax. You think my family has made me weak? My family has made me see more clearly than ever. And what I see is that your vision for Horizon 1, built on burnout, fear, and isolation, is not just morally bankrupt. It's bad business. Dax's face flushed with anger. The board won't stand for this sentimentality. We have a responsibility to our shareholders to create sustainable value, Bryn Carter interrupted, stepping forward. Which Lyndon's leadership has consistently delivered. Perhaps it's time we reconsider who truly has Horizon's best interests at heart. Dax looked around, realizing he'd miscalculated. The crowd's sympathy was clearly with Lyndon and Mara. This isn't over, he hissed before stalking away. Later that night, as they drove home, Mara reached for Lyndon's hand. Are you worried about what he'll do next? Lyndon brought her hand to his lips. No, because whatever comes, we'll face it together. And that makes us stronger than Dax can possibly understand. If this story resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear that love can emerge from the most unexpected arrangements. And if you believe that choosing family over fortune is the ultimate power move, let me know in the comments below. Standing under the stars that night, neither could have imagined how the next years would test them, or how fiercely they would fight to protect what they'd built together. 6 years later, the Chase family had expanded and flourished in ways neither Lyndon nor Mara could have predicted. Reagan, now a precocious 7-year-old, with her father's analytical mind and her mother's determination, had been joined by 4-year-old twins, Finn and Bryn, an unexpected blessing that had turned their carefully ordered lives into beautiful chaos. Their home, once designed for separation, had been completely renovated to reflect their united family. The walls between their original wings had been removed, creating open, flowing spaces where family life unfolded in all its messy glory. Lyndon, once known only for his business acumen, had become equally recognized for his family-centered approach to corporate leadership. After the showdown with Dax at the shareholders' gala, the board had voted overwhelmingly to support Lyndon's vision. Dax had been forced out, his short-sighted strategies rejected in favor of Lyndon's more sustainable, human-centered approach. Horizon Innovations now boasted industry-leading family leave policies, on-site childcare, and flexible work arrangements, all inspired by Lyndon's own journey into parenthood. The company had thrived, proving that compassionate leadership could coexist with business success. Mara had returned to work full-time when the twins turned 3, but on her own terms. She now headed Horizon's newly created foundation, directing the company's philanthropic efforts toward supporting single parents and children's education causes that resonated deeply with both her and Lyndon. On a crisp autumn morning, as they prepared for Reagan's school presentation, Lyndon found Mara in their bedroom, struggling with the clasp of the circle pendant he had given her years ago. "Allow me," he said, stepping behind her to fasten it. Their eyes met in the mirror, and Mara saw in his gaze the same wonder that had been there the first time he felt Reagan kick, as though he still couldn't quite believe this life was his. "Do you ever think about how differently things might have turned out?" she asked, leaning back against him. "If I hadn't fainted that day?" Lyndon's arms encircled her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. "I've built a career on analyzing variables and predicting outcomes," he said thoughtfully. "But I've never been able to imagine a scenario where we don't end up exactly here, even though our beginning was so unconventional. Especially because of that, His lips brushed her temple. We built this life deliberately, Mara. Not because of social expectations or romantic delusions, but because we chose each other day after day. A crash from downstairs, followed by childish arguing and the sound of their nanny's patient intervention, broke the moment. Mara laughed. Speaking of our deliberately built life, I wouldn't change a thing, Lyndon said, his rare full smile transforming his face. Not one single thing. As they headed downstairs to manage the morning chaos of backpacks, breakfast, and sibling squabbles, Mara reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From a single night of connection, to a faint in a boardroom, to a revelation that had changed everything. Their story had unfolded in ways neither could have scripted. What had begun as a practical arrangement between two career-focused individuals had evolved into a partnership built on mutual respect, shared purpose, and eventually, a love that had surprised them both with its depth and resilience. Reagan rushed to greet them, her school project clutched proudly in her hands. The twins followed, Finn with his shirt already untucked, and Bryn with mismatched shoes. As Lyndon knelt to help Bryn while simultaneously listening to Reagan's excited explanation of her presentation, Mara captured the moment in her memory. This man who had once defined himself solely by his business achievements, now finding his greatest joy in the simple act of being present for his children. "Daddy, my presentation is about family structures," Reagan announced. "I'm going to tell my class about how families come in all different forms." "That sounds wonderful, sweetheart," Lyndon replied, straightening Finn's collar with practiced ease. "I'm using us as an example," she continued. "How you and Mommy started with a business agreement but built a real family." Lyndon and Mara exchanged startled glances. "And how did you learn about that?" Mara asked carefully. Reagan rolled her eyes in the way only a 7-year-old could perfect. "Aunt Lana told me. She said it was the most romantic, unromantic story ever." Lyndon chuckled. "Your aunt has a way with words." "Is it true?" Reagan persisted. "Did you really make Mommy sign a contract?" "It was a bit more complicated than that," Lyndon began. "But essentially, yes," Mara finished. "We thought we could plan everything perfectly. But you fell in love anyway," Reagan said with satisfaction. "Just like in the stories." "Just like in the stories," Lyndon agreed, his eyes meeting Mara's over their daughter's head. "Though, our story is better." Later that evening, after the children were asleep, Lyndon found Mara in their home office reviewing foundation proposals. "I have something to show you," he said, taking her hand and leading her to the terrace. There, under the stars where he had given her the pendant 6 years earlier, a small table had been set with candles, wine, and her favorite dessert. "What's the occasion?" she asked, touched by the gesture. Lyndon guided her to a seat, then took the chair opposite, his expression unusually solemn. "7 years ago today, you agreed to marry me." Mara's eyes widened in surprise. "Our contract expiration date." "Exactly." He reached across the table for her hand. "According to our original agreement, today we would be discussing whether to continue our arrangement." "I'd forgotten," she admitted, and it was true. The clinical agreement they had made seemed to belong to different people, strangers, who couldn't have imagined the life they would build together. "I haven't," Lyndon said. "I've been thinking about it for months." A flicker of uncertainty passed through Mara. And I find the terms of our original agreement completely inadequate." From his pocket, he produced a small velvet box. "So, I'm proposing a new one." Inside the box was a ring, not the ostentatious diamond one might expect from a billionaire, but an elegant band of intertwined platinum and gold, set with stones that matched their children's birthstones. "Lyndon," Mara breathed, recognizing the thoughtfulness behind the design. "7 years ago, I asked you to marry me because it was the logical solution to an unexpected situation," he said, his voice steady, but filled with emotion. "Today, I'm asking you to marry me again. Not out of practicality or obligation, but because loving you and building this life with you has been the greatest privilege of my existence." Tears filled Mara's eyes as he continued. "Our first marriage was a business arrangement with an expiration date. I'm proposing a second one, a true marriage, without terms or conditions or end dates. Just us, choosing each other every day for the rest of our lives. He slid from his chair to one knee beside her, still holding her hand. Mara Quinchase, will you marry me again? This time for all the right reasons? Through her tears, Mara laughed, a sound of pure joy. Yes, she said simply, for all the right reasons. As Lyndon slipped the ring onto her finger, joining the simple band she had worn for 7 years, Mara marveled at life's unexpected turns. A single moment of connection, a fainting spell in a boardroom, a revelation that had seemed like the end of her carefully planned life, all had led her here. To a love story written not in grand gestures or fairy tale beginnings, but in daily choices, mutual respect, and the courage to let an arrangement of convenience evolve into something far more profound. Lyndon stood, pulling her into his arms. I never believed in love, he murmured against her hair. Until you showed me that it isn't something you fall into by accident, but something you build deliberately, day by day. The best business decision you ever made, Mara teased gently. No, Lyndon corrected, his eyes serious as they met hers. The moment I stopped thinking like a businessman and started thinking like a man who had been given a second chance at family, that was when everything changed. The next morning, as they prepared for their second wedding, a small intimate ceremony with their children and closest friends, Lyndon received an unexpected email. It was from Dax Morgan. Dax? Mara asked, noticing his expression. What does he want after all this time? Lyndon handed her his tablet. The message was brief. Congratulations on proving me wrong. The quarterly reports speak for themselves. Perhaps there is something to this family-first approach after all. DM. Well? Mara said, surprised. That's unexpected. People can change, Lyndon replied thoughtfully. Some just take longer than others. Do you think he means it? Lyndon considered. I think he's recognized that the world is changing. The old ways of doing business, the burnout, the sacrifice of personal life, they're becoming obsolete. Even Dax can see the data. Speaking of data, Mara said with a smile, our children are currently attempting to decorate the wedding cake themselves. We should probably intervene before statistical disaster strikes. They found the children in the kitchen, flour covering every surface, icing smeared across little faces, and a lopsided cake that looked nothing like the elegant design they'd planned. We wanted to surprise you, Reagan explained, her expression anxious. Is it ruined? Lyndon surveyed the chaos, then looked at the eager faces of his children. Once, such disorder would have irritated him. Now, he saw only the love behind their efforts. It's perfect, he declared, scooping Bryn up despite her sticky hands. The most perfect cake I've ever seen. As they all worked together to clean up the mess, laughing and teasing each other, Mara caught Lyndon's eye across the kitchen. In that ordinary moment of family life, so far from the sterile, controlled existence they had once planned, she saw everything they had built together. Later that day, surrounded by those they loved, Lyndon and Mara exchanged vows that needed no legal documents to bind them. Vows spoken not out of obligation or practicality, but from hearts that had learned, through the daily work of parenting and partnership, how to love each other completely. Reagan stood proudly beside them, holding the twins' hands, the living embodiment of how an unexpected beginning could lead to the most beautiful destination. I once thought I knew exactly what success looked like, Lyndon said, holding Mara's hands in his. Corner office, market dominance, industry recognition. I was wrong. Success is this building something meaningful, with someone who challenges you to be better. Creating a family that reminds you daily of what truly matters. I once thought I could plan every detail of my life, Mara responded, her voice steady despite her tears. Control every variable, predict every outcome. Then I fainted in a boardroom, and everything changed. What seemed like the end of my carefully constructed plan turned out to be the beginning of something far more beautiful than I could have imagined. As they sealed their renewed commitment with a kiss, their children cheering beside them, Mara knew that their story, unconventional as it was, had always been heading toward this moment. Not because of fate or destiny, but because they had both been brave enough to let an unexpected beginning lead them to a future neither could have imagined. A future built not on contractual obligations or practical arrangements, but on the most solid foundation of all two people who had learned that true success isn't measured in profit margins or market share, but in moments of connection, in growth shared, in a family created and nurtured together. "To think," Lyndon whispered as they danced later that evening, their children twirling around them. "All of this because you fainted in a meeting. The best business presentation disaster in history." Mara agreed with a laugh. "I love you," he said simply, the words once so foreign to him now as natural as breathing. "Contract or no contract, I love you too," she replied, resting her head against his chest. "For at least the next 7 years. And after that," Mara smiled up at him, "we'll renegotiate. I have a feeling the terms will be favorable." As the evening wound down, their family and friends surrounding them with love and support, Lyndon and Mara stood together on the terrace, where so many important moments in their relationship had unfolded. The stars above, the ocean before them, and between them, a bond that had evolved from a practical arrangement into something neither had been looking for, but both had found a love story written in their own unique language. You've witnessed how a single unexpected moment, a fainting spell in a boardroom, changed 2 lives forever. How a cold business arrangement slowly transformed into a deep, genuine love. How Lyndon Chase, once defined solely by corporate success, discovered that true fulfillment comes from family and connection. In a world that often tells us to choose between career and personal happiness, Lyndon and Mara found a way to have both, not by compromising, but by redefining what success truly means. They learned that vulnerability isn't weakness, that love isn't a distraction from achievement, but the greatest achievement of all. Hit subscribe right now if you believe in building a world where family and humanity matter more than profit and power. Only people like Dax, who value money over human connection, would watch this entire story and not subscribe to Mr. Sterling's Secrets of Love. And remember, sometimes life's most beautiful journeys begin with moments we never planned for. Sometimes our carefully constructed paths must crumble before we can find our way to where we truly belong. And sometimes the most meaningful contracts aren't written on paper, but in the daily choices we make to love, to grow, and to build something that lasts far beyond any business empire. Until next time, this is Mr. Sterling, reminding you that the greatest success story you'll ever write is the one where you open your heart to unexpected possibilities.